Hello everybody and welcome to another Bentley Davey Tutors video. Just a preface before we get going on this one, it is a bit late and I've been working a lot today. So if I make random mistakes in the middle of this video, it's not my fault. So basically this video, me and Luke somewhat separately, which I'll explain in a second, will be analysing The Great Gatsby. It's a great novel that I have definitely read entirely. And yeah, it's a really good novel. We've been studying it through the first half of the year, so that's why we're making a video on it now. And essentially, the video is going to be split up into two parts. For most Gatsby essays or questions, there are two ways that you can answer or respond to them. Either writing a response that is themes-based or a response which is characters-based. For this complete overview of The Great Gatsby, I will go through the central themes of the novel and Luke will go through the characters. Ideally, this should allow you to choose which approach you are more comfortable with writing about. Neither of them is necessarily correct and making the other one wrong. They're both completely fine. Technically speaking, the theme-based responses can sometimes be more complex, but not always, and often the character responses are absolutely the way to go. So as I mentioned in the intro, I will be looking at themes first. I'll be going over the themes of excessive wealth, status, imitations, spiritual impoverishment, the failure of the American dream, and the city as a wasteland. So for each of these themes, I'll be speaking about what it actually is, what The Great Gatsby tells us about it, and then some key quotes, analysis of them, and how you can sort of use them. So we're going to start off with excessive wealth. So what actually is it? So excessive wealth or it's really great speaking for me, or excess in general, is a large part of what is originally shown to us as the reader of Gatsby. The traditional Gatsby party is what we're shown, that still occurs today, is one where we see extreme excess, where everything you could ever want is there and is available to you. And so what does The Great Gatsby itself, the book itself, say about it? So The Great Gatsby sets up wealth originally to be a good thing, as it shows our protagonist, Jay Gatsby, showing off his wealth and everybody loving him for it, pretty much, showing up to all his parties and stuff. However, by the end of the novel, we see that this excessive wealth doesn't actually get him what he wants, as I'll explain in the next section. So basically, key quotes for this theme. So there are some really good quotes to use here. About wealth, like those from chapter 3, which is when the big main party came through. But some good quotes generally are buffet tables of baked hams and pastry pigs and turkeys. This quote uses polysyndeton, which is the repetition of the word and, to exemplify the excess here and how excessive everything is. Then there's the quote, every Friday, every Monday. And this quote shows that these parties are occurring essentially every day. Next quote is, it was gas blue with lavender beads, $265. This statement from the character of Lucille is speaking about about a dress that Gatsby bought her after she tore her dress at one of his parties, showing how much income he could afford to let go of. As well as this, we see the quote, colossal affair. This visual imagery is used to describe Gatsby's house, and it shows the sheer size of it. Finally, we've got no thin 5-piece affair, but a whole pit full of oboes and trombones and saxophones and viols. They say more, but you can cut the quote off wherever you want. And this quote again uses polysyndeton, which is the repetition of the word and, to show the excess of all of Gatsby's stuff. So that's all for wealth, but there's lots of other quotes you could obviously use. Those are just a few good ones. So the next thing that we're going to build off in terms of that issue is status. So what is it here? So status is huge in The Great Gatsby. Essentially how it works is you've got three different groups. You've got the old money people, the new money people, and essentially everybody else, which is just the normal people. And what does The Great Gatsby tell us about status? Well, it tells us that the aristocratic system that was present in Europe has now literally, which was a big reason to actually move to the US as part of the American dream, with the idea that there'd be no aristocratic system to stop you and you could just keep moving up and up and up, just actually became replaced with the old money, new money divide. And it tells us that no matter how much money you have, you cannot become old money and bridge that ideological divide. So some of the key quotes here, there are some great quotes all throughout the novel about status. However, some great ones are as follows. Obviously, we've got East Egg, which is just a nice quote, and then also West Egg, the less fashionable of the two. They're good quotes which set up our geographical metaphor. It's actually geographical extended metaphor, which we've also got separated only by a courtesy bay. which reinforces the geographical metaphor with an ironic statement showing the ideological divide between the East and West eggs. Nick tells us as well that Daisy's voice is full of money, which is a metaphor used to explain the class the class radiating from somebody of old money. The book then tells us that despite any amount of wealth, this gap cannot be bridged for Gatsby. Tom calls Gatsby Mr. Nobody from Nowhere, where adnomination, which is the repetition of the root of a word, in this case no, as in nobody and nowhere, is used to affirm the fact that despite Gatsby's now immense wealth, he cannot bridge this ideological chasm, and he will never be truly part of that old money world. Finally, the novel shows us that those with status can avoid all consequences, with Nick stating they were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures and retreated back to their money and let other people clean up the mess they had made. The accusatory tone here by Nick shows his discontent for how those with high status can act and essentially get away with no consequences. So our next issue here is imitations. Sorry, I'm calling it an issue. Realistically, it's a theme. So what is it here? Imitation is a great and really important part of the novel, and we see a lot of stuff come out of it. Essentially, an imitation is when something is fake, but instead pretends to be true. And The Great Gatsby shows us that these imitations can fail, and while some people can see through it, when some people can't see through the imitation, others can, and cracks begin to form in it. It also tells us that an imitation can't get you across the line in terms of bridging the chasm that we spoke about before. So some key quotes here. There are so many quotes that you can use, so that's a really good thing here. We've got things like a factual imitation of some Hotel de Ville in Normandy. This quote describes Gatsby's house as purely an imitation. We've also got Thin Beard of Ivy, which is a great example of personification, which is used to hide the imitation underneath. The reference to the character Belasco, who was an American set designer, symbolizes that Gatsby's home is purely just a film set and not actually an authentic place. There are more quotes about the house that you can find if you would like, but now we can look more at Gatsby himself as an imitation. I'm an Oxford man is a repeated claim by Gatsby to appear authentic, when in reality he actually never went to Oxford. And he also tells Daisy and Nick, I have a man in England who buys me shirts, a symbol of how he attempts to associate himself to that English aristocracy that we told about before. He also claims to be a war hero, showing Nick his medal from Montenegro. Nick claims, to my surprise, it had an authentic look, this being a pathetic symbol of Gatsby's imitation, pretending to be a war hero to appear authentic. We also know that Gatsby made his money illegally, through bootlegging, which is the illegal sale of alcohol during the Prohibition. And Gatsby even offers this sort of line of work to Nick, but Nick, however, says the offer was obviously and tactlessly for a service to be rendered, which is him basically saying it was clearly criminal activity, and so he had no choice but to cut Gatsby off there. Finally, we see the motif of the owl-eyed man who enters the library and is shocked to see that the books are absolutely real. That's a quote there. To his surprise, considering the rest of the illusion. However, ironically, he states he didn't cut the pages, showing that the illusion went just as far as it needed to. The owl-eyed man finally prophesies that if one brick was removed, the whole place was liable to collapse, a hyperbole showing the strenuous nature of the imitation that is about to fall apart. Our next theme is spiritual impoverishment. And so what actually is spiritual impoverishment? Well, this is a nice theme that can often feature even in the actual exam or even in the essay question that you may get. Essentially, spiritual impoverishment was something that modernist writers like to talk about a lot, and it's essentially straying away from your morality. This is things like materialism, affairs, excessive drinking, and anything that basically you could consider bad behavior. And so The Great Gatsby tells us that spiritual impoverishment is the downfall of society. We see everybody from city officials to police officers engaging in immoral and often illegal behaviour, and this leads to significant downfalls in the actions of people. Once again, we've got lots of nice quotes for these ones that you can use. So a great one is come out in a pyramid of pulpless halves. This is a quote referring to a stack of juiced oranges that come out of each party. However, the actually important bit here is the symbolism to the party goers who also leave the parties as pulpless halves. And why they're pulpless is because essentially they're now empty spiritually, basically. They've got nothing left in them. We also hear that the partygoers adhere to the rules of behaviour associated with an amusement park, and this metaphor alludes to the party guests treating the party poorly. Men and girls came and went like moths among the whispering and the champagne and the stars, is another great quote where zoomorphism, which is when you give a human animal features, and as well as insect imagery to the moths, is used to show how the party guests are attracted to the glitz and the glam of the parties, but are inside hollow. The line "introductions forgotten on the spot" also refers to how people at these parties meet each other and then instantly forget who they've just met. Further spiritual impoverishment is shown throughout Tom's affairs with Myrtle, who he then proceeds to break her nose with his open hand. There are many more that you can find in terms of examples of spiritual impoverishment, but these are some really good ones here. Our next theme is the failure of the American dream. So the American dream, as we all know, was originally around life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but in the end it was corrupted into a quest for eternal wealth. However, we see that the American dream, through its corruption, can very easily fail. The Great Gatsby tells us that no amount of money or wealth can help achieve this dream because the American dream is in itself unattainable. Gatsby's American dream is Daisy, and we see that that fails to come off despite his incredible wealth. So some key quotes here. We get some great quotes here as well. Golden Girl is a nice metaphor used to describe Daisy as the epitome of Gatsby's dream. And then the quote, "A single green light, minute and far away." This is a solid use of symbolism here to symbolise the fact that Gatsby's dream looks possible, but the ideological chasm between old money and new money is just too big to cross. You can also use the quote, "His dream must have seemed so close that he could hardly fail to grasp it if you would like." There must have been moments that afternoon when that Daisy tumbled short of his dreams because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. This is a very nice quote that shows us that Gatsby's dream has just become too great and now he can't ever achieve it. Finally, we've got the quote, "A thin red circle in the water," which is a nice quote as it's used to symbolize Gatsby's death and shows the ultimate failure of his dream. And finally, you can use Myrtle's death with her left breast was swinging open like a flap to again show the visual imagery of death and the failure to achieve the unattainable American dream. Finally, we have the theme of the city as a wasteland. So our final theme is about what happened to modern man as a result of everything else that we've basically spoken about. And this is essentially symbolized in terms of the Valley of Ashes. So the Valley of Ashes essentially shows us all of the pain and damage that is caused when the world acts in the ways that the characters do throughout the book. And we see the Valley of Ashes as act as the key graveyard of the American dream. So there aren't as many quotes for this theme as it's a bit more narrow, but some good ones are "This is a Valley of Ashes," which obviously is just a nice one to set up what the place is called and basically just what it is. And then the next quote is "A fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat in the ridges and the hills and into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens." A beautiful piece of visual imagery which shows the valley as a place of ash and a symbol of death. Finally, you can talk about the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, a representation of the omniscient force looking out on the city as a wasteland. So that is all I've got in terms of themes here, and essentially what we were touching on in the intro is when you want to write an essay on Gatsby, you could either write a paragraph on each of these themes, or you could write a paragraph on each of the characters that Luke's about to discuss. So I will hand over to him, and hopefully he will do a good outro. But that is all from me, so I hope you enjoyed.
Hello everybody, this is voiceover Jeremy here. Just saying, as I'm editing this, I really hope for everybody's sake that Luke actually makes some jokes in his part of the video, because I've just rewatched mine and it was very boring. Hopefully it was at least useful, and hopefully Luke can produce something slightly better. So look out for this. I predict there'll be at least 3 jokes. That'd be quite good.
Alright, now that Jeremy's done, you'll get to move on to me. Hopefully you did a good enough job explaining the themes of the novel, and that's one way you can approach the essay. The other way to look at it is a character-based essay and what they represent, and that's what I'll go through now. I'll explain who each character is, how you can write about them, and then also a few quotes about each one. Keep in mind there are plenty of quotes about each character, and I've just pulled out a few while I've quickly tried to prepare this video. So I'll get straight into it. We'll start with J. Gatsby. So Gatsby is the character who the book is all about. Hopefully, if you're watching this video, you already know that. But anyways, he's a young man, about 30 years old. He lives next door to Nick in a mansion on West Egg. where he has all these lavish parties and everything you can pretty much imagine. Through the book, we find out that he's able to afford all of these parties though, because he achieved his wealth through his participation in organised crime, including distributing illegal alcohol and fixing the World Series. And while he always wanted to be rich, his main motivation was his love for Daisy Buchanan. His main motivation was his love for Daisy and how much he wanted to impress her. And as a result of his obsession of Daisy, Gatsby actually dies when he takes the blame of killing Myrtle and then gets shot in his pool. So if you wanted to write about Gatsby, you can pretty much use any of the themes which Jeremy talked about. So if you're looking to write about it, and I'll just go through a few main ones. You could talk about the failure of the American dream and how Gatsby was so invested in creating his appearance to impress Daisy that he turned to illegal means, and even then he ultimately didn't secure Daisy, who really represents the American dream to him. You could also talk about the construction of his identity, or imitations, as I think Jeremy put it. He reveals himself to be an innocent, hopeful young man who has big dreams, and also makes it appear as though he was always rich. However, we know this isn't true and that it was all a facade. So a few quotes. Firstly, her voice is full of money. So Gatsby says this about Daisy's voice, and the metaphor of money shows how Gatsby wants Daisy because she represents old money. Another quote is, it was testimony to the romantic speculation, inspired that there were whispers about him from those who had found little that it was necessary to whisper about in this world. And this shows how Gatsby's reputation is built on gossip and shrouded in mystery. Next is, it excited him too that many men had already loved Daisy. It increased her value in his eyes. Here, the economic metaphor of increased value again shows how Gatsby wants Daisy because she symbolizes wealth, and his desire for her cannot be separated from a concept of value. And finally, there's the motif of the phrase "old sport," which is an Oxford phrase, and he uses the repeated symbol to represent his family's wealth, but we know that's all a lie, and so it was used to construct his identity as coming from old money. The next character I'll go over is Daisy. So Daisy is Tom's wife, and also is Nick's cousin, who is the narrator of the book. She also knew Gatsby before he left for the military. She lives in East Egg, comes from old money, and is a part of that upper class, meaning that she has a high social status. She does end up being unfaithful in her marriage and getting with Gatsby until he's exposed for who he really is by Tom. Fitzgerald characterizes her as an impetuous and impulsive woman who's someone who smashes things up but then retreats behind her money. She also seems to be aware and a perceptive individual. However, she chooses to conform to the socio-cultural expectations of gender as dictated by the patriarchy and the conservative elites. Daisy shows her true colours in Chapter 7, though, when she chooses Tom over Gatsby because of the security and safety of Tom's lifestyle, and also when she lets Gatsby take the blame for killing Myrtle, even though she was driving, and letting Gatsby take the blame eventually resulted in his death. So if you wanted to talk about Daisy in an essay, there's a few things you could talk about. You can talk about how she sacrifices her happiness to ensure her financial stability and reputation, and you could also talk about the excess of wealth she has and the excess of goods, and then also the emphasis she has on her status and her disregard for morals. I've only got 2 quotes here for Daisy just because, I've done this quite quickly, and also a lot of the quotes about Daisy come from other characters, so there'll be more throughout my part of this video. So firstly, there's I'm paralyzed with happiness. So there's a hyphen between the first P and then paralyzed, and that shows that she stuttered, and that suggests that she hesitated and she's a sensitive and fragile woman. And then there's also the longer quote that and I hope she'll be a fool. That's the best thing a girl can be in this world, a beautiful little fool. And this shows that Daisy may actually be a complex and intelligent woman with a deep understanding of the world she lives in. She becomes cynical of the world, and her awareness is evidenced by saying that she hopes her daughter is a fool, and pretty much saying that the best thing a woman can be is clueless and to ignore everything that is bad is happening around her. There's also another one. It's on page 107. It passed, and he began to talk excitedly to Daisy, denying everything, defending his name against accusations that had not been made. But with every word, she was drawing further and further into herself, so he gave that up. And only the dead dream fought on as the afternoon slipped away, trying to touch what was no longer tangible, struggling unhappily, undespairingly, toward that lost voice across the room. So here, that's when Gatsby gets exposed for who he truly is, and it shows that Daisy is like slowly pulling further and further away from Gatsby because she's like figured out that Gatsby can't actually provide that financial security, which Tom can provide. The next character is Tom. So Tom is Daisy's husband, and obviously he also lives in East Egg and comes from old money then. From early on, we find out he's cheating on Daisy with Myrtle and that they have a secret relationship. Tom also exposes Gatsby for who he truly is when he finds out Daisy is cheating on him, which leads to Daisy coming back to Tom for that security. In the book, Tom epitomizes masculine brutality and violence, which is clearly seen in his interactions with Myrtle when she tries to assert her own will. The cruelty of the upper class and their exploitation of those beneath them, and that idea is best seen with his interactions with George Wilson, who's Myrtle's husband. So if you wanted to write about Tom, you can just talk about, you can focus on his exploitation of the lower class, and again, the interactions he has with George Wilson are great examples of this. And you could also talk about the carefree or immoral lifestyle he has, cheating on his wife. So a few quotes. Firstly, he's described as having a cruel body, and here Fitzgerald uses the words cruel body to connote his strong muscular physique, which is actually symbolic of the aggressiveness implicit in his personality. And also another quote, making a short, deft movement, Tom Buchanan broke her nose with his open hand. And again, that's another example of Tom's physical violence and brutality when he breaks Myrtle's nose. The next character is Myrtle. So Myrtle is George Wilson's husband, and she's also the woman that Tom's cheating with. She feels imprisoned in her marriage with George, who she married because she believed he had good breeding. Myrtle and George live together in the Valley of Ashes, which Jeremy previously talked about. And she's introduced close to the start of the book when she spends time with Tom, and they go and spend a lot of money buying all these different things. She comes out later in the book as well when she's hit by a car, which Daisy was driving. Fitzgerald characterizes her as superficial and a victim of the brutality of the upper class, and also one of the biggest believers in the American dream. So if you're looking to write about Myrtle, you can talk about themes like the desire for reaching the upper class, the excess of wealth, consumerism, and materialism, and also when she's with Tom, the brutality of the upper class. So a few quotes. Firstly, she was faintly stout, but she carried her flesh sensuously, and there was an immediate perceptible vitality about her, as if the nerves of her body were smouldering. The repetition of anatomical references, flesh and nerves, creates visual imagery, hyperbolizing her physical bodily representations, and then again that refers to her marital infidelity through the sexualized description of her appearance upon Tom's entrance. Next, she smiled slowly and, walking through her husband as if he were a ghost, shook hands with Tom, looking him flush in the eye. The simile of ghost compares George to an apparition that lacks substance, highlighting his lack of importance to her. And finally, a moving picture magazine, some cold cream, and a small flask of perfume, and also I want one of those dogs. The cumulative chain of nouns connoting consumer goods, magazine, cream, and perfume emphasizes her materialistic sentiment. So second last, we have George Wilson. George Wilson is Myrtle's husband, and he's the owner of a rundown auto shop at the edge of the Valley of Ashes. He loves and idealizes Myrtle and is devastated by her affair with Tom. He's filled with grief when Myrtle is killed, and because he believes Gatsby was the one to kill her with his car, he goes to his house and shoots Gatsby before shooting himself. In the novel, he's represented as a man who was willing to be emasculated and also act in a psychopathic way, or pretty much a massive sucker. And he does that if it enables him to make money. So if you wanted to talk about him, you could talk about his desire to become wealthy and also the abuse he faces from the upper class being Tom. And there's just one quote here. It's when he's talking to Tom and Tom disagrees with something he says. And George says, "I don't mean that," explained Wilson quickly. The adverb quickly connotes Wilson's desire to avert a conflict and rather to appease Tom in order to ensure his car is sold and he makes some money. The final character I'll go through is Nick Carraway. So Nick Carraway is the narrator in the novel. He's a quiet and reflective Midwesterner who moved to New York to learn the bond business. He lives next door to Gatsby in West Egg and is Daisy's cousin. He's characterized as an impartial and fastidious figure, but in fact he's a pseudo-objective narrator who is not actually objective at all. And it's revealed that he is actually a guilty bystander and is complicit in everything that is going on. His role accentuates the modernist emphasis in the text, in the question about objectivity and the search for truth. If you wanted to write about Nick, I mean, I don't really know how you could write about Nick purely on his own, but if you really wanted to write about him, it'd probably be much easier to talk about his relationships with other characters in the novel, and then you can incorporate the other ideas, which I've talked about of those characters and the relationship they have. So before I go into the quotes about him, just something to keep in mind is that Nick comes out at the start of the book telling the audience that he doesn't judge anyone and that like he's an objective figure, but then he literally judges people for the entire book. So there's plenty of quotes which show that, and you can have a fun time finding those on your own. But for some of the quotes I do have, firstly there is, I'm inclined to reserve all judgments. So again, that's sort of him coming out telling the audience that like he's objective and he's like trustworthy. And the next quote is, I was privy to the secrets, griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently I feigned sleep, preoccupation, or a hostile levity, where I realized by some unmistakable sign that an intimate revelation was quivering on the horizon. So that quote foreshadows Nick becoming a confidant for two opposing men, being Tom and Gatsby, and the complications which come from that. Finally, they're a rotten crowd. I shouted across the lawn. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together. So this comes from the last time that Nick sees Gatsby and shows how he's sympathetic of Gatsby, even though he disapproves of Gatsby until the end. And again, as I mentioned before, it reveals that he's not truly objective, and the relationships he's forged do impact how he narrates the story, and also that he does have an opinion on all the characters which he's supposed to be objectively narrating about. So that's all the characters that I'll go through. There are a lot of other side characters such as Wolfsheim and Owl Eyes, but you wouldn't really spend a whole lot of time analysing them on their own. But if you wanted to write about those characters, there's plenty of quotes you can find. And also any of the characters I've talked about, there's like a lot of other quotes which represent different things and the themes that Jeremy talked about as well, which you can find in the book as well. So hopefully after watching this, you've got an amazing knowledge of the Great Gatsby, and now you can smash out any piece of work to do with Fitzgerald's novel. Again, keep an eye out for other videos that's coming out at the moment in the exam period we're going through. I hope Jeremy, you can just figure out a conclusion from what I've just said there.
Right, so I've just been pretty chucked on the spot there while editing because Luke has now said that he wants a conclusion from me, which, look, I'm happy to do, but, you know, some forewarning would have been good. Hopefully you've all enjoyed today's video. I apologise, there's, like, no energy from both of us throughout the whole thing. It was a long Saturday yesterday, and it's been a long day today getting everything done as well. So yeah, sorry about that. Hopefully we still got through all the content that you wanted to see. As Luke said, keep an eye out for all of our other videos coming out. I actually think this is one of the last ones that's coming out, but I think we have 2 more maths ones coming in the next couple of days as well. So keep your eye out for them. Hope you enjoyed, and leave a like and subscribe. Thank you, and goodbye.